So what do you do when the world comes crashing down around you? Well, as a society right now, if you look at some of the things that we're facing, you see global warming, gun violence, incredible poverty, widening gaps between rich and poor, real news and fake news. What do you do when your world, in a similar way, feels to be crashing on you as an individual? Well, I'm going to flash back to when I was about 40, and I had been in a very, very difficult marriage, and I finally got the courage to leave. And I was the mother of 2 young daughters, and my career was beginning to build, and I was diagnosed with cancer. All at the same time. So I'm vying between Memorial Sloan Kettering and the court and work and reading stories, and it was very overwhelming. And my world felt pretty heavy. But one small thing, one step at a time, my girls and I got through it, and we started to establish ourselves. And as they grew, my older daughter, Lauren, was heading off to college in LA. My career was really blossoming. I had, at that time, been a founding CEO of a number of advertising agencies. My younger daughter was doing great in high school. And I was asked to take a job instead of being an entrepreneur, which I am, and a startup person, to be a CEO of a turnaround company. Now, turning around agencies is really tough because it's about downsizing, it's about right-sizing, it's about all these things that are unpleasant, and it was the recession. So to be doing a turnaround at a time of economic crisis was overwhelming and difficult. And I was being interviewed by a reporter who had just come back doing research in Uganda about a small town where it was pretty much all kids. Parents had died of AIDS or malaria, or they'd left, or they were in jail. And she and some other people wanted to break the cycle of poverty. And I said, you know, your story is way more interesting than a story about a turnaround CEO during a recession. I would like to join you. And I joined her in this mission to start a school in Africa. And it turned out to be great because my company could rally behind and feel good during this tough time. I had something to focus on that felt like it was giving back to community in a meaningful way. And my oldest daughter, who was sort of looking to get her legs grounded, also came and was a teacher for the summer. She was teaching math and English, and it was just great for everybody. Until one day when I was visiting her at the school, my cell phone rang, and I saw that it was Memorial Sloan Kettering calling. And on the other end of the line was not the nurse who I'd always got calls from, and she'd say, you're doing fine, we'll see you in 3 months, or we'll see you in 6 months. It was the oncologist. Now, for any of you who have been involved with cancer, you know you don't want a call from the oncologist. And the news wasn't so great. And he said, you know, Anne, I'm sorry to tell you, but the last biopsy showed your cancer is back. It's accelerated. You need to come home, and we're going to have some surgery. So, you know, I'm a badass CEO. I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. I can do this. And I get on the plane, and I fly home, and I walk through up Madison Avenue to tell my boss I'm going to take a few weeks off. I'm going to have the surgery. I'm going to come back. I'm going to run the company. And he said, I'm going to have someone else run the company. And in that moment, I lost my job, my health, and my last kid was about to go to college. And that was my self-definition. So if you're defined by what you do for a living, or if you're defined by whose mother you are, or whose daughter you are, or whose wife you are, and if you're the person who got up at 4:45 in the morning in New Jersey and drove into Manhattan and went to the gym and worked out and got to the office at 7:30 and ran the company and got home and listened to all of the important things that had happened during your daughter's days, and you weren't that healthy person anymore either, who are you? And it was an incredibly difficult time, and I call it the time of the space in between. You probably know the space in between. It's after what was, everything that's familiar to you, and before what will be, that yet undefined thing. It's painful. I mean, I had spent 40 plus years of my life doing and achieving instead of feeling. But I had to live with that feeling. Now, luckily, I wasn't completely alone. I had a long-distance boyfriend, and the happy news is he's now my husband. But I had a long-distance boyfriend who was super supportive, came with me to the surgery. He encouraged me, and it's sort of in my nature to prove that I'm still alive. So we walked into Central Park after I'd gotten out of the hospital, and I sat on those hard park benches and watched Al Pacino in The Merchant of Venice, and he was fabulous, and I felt alive. And then I had to decide, what do I do? I mean, my natural inclination would have been, get back on that horse, go get another job, go run another company. But David was incredibly prescient, and he said, it's kind of clear that this life you're leading is not the healthiest life for you. He was a Californian, I was a New Yorker, but I had grown up in Seattle. And so when he said, why don't you think about starting again and let's move to San Francisco, I said yes. So now I'm 50 years old, I'm jumping on a plane, I'm dropping Kira off at Tulane, and I'm heading to San Francisco to start a new life. And when all of this was going on, I realized that all that I had left behind of those thousands of people that I had worked with over the years, who had worked for me, who I had worked for, when the going got tough, when I was not in a position of power, they were gone. And I realized that all of these relationships had been transactional. It had been based on what I could do for them or what someone could do for someone. And I had maybe 5 close friends who visited me in the hospital or who followed up to see how I was going. I have a lovely family. They're in Seattle. They definitely checked in. But in terms of what I was left with, it was not those relationships. And so I had to think about, how do I start life again moving to a city where I didn't know a soul? I was lucky enough in the course of my career to be a fellow of the Aspen Institute and a Henry Crown Fellow. And what that meant was, for a couple of years, I was in a program with 19 other super high-performing young people, and we talked about values-based leadership. But really what we did was we read the classics, or we listened to a piece of music, or we shared a common experience that then we could talk about, and it brought us super close together. So whether it was in the room a Democrat or Republican, an American or a non-American, a private sector person, a public sector person, we all found common truths and safety and trust in each other. And I thought, yes, I'm missing that. And in this space in between, I also thought, I'm one of 3 daughters. I'm the mother of 2 daughters, and I went to Wellesley College, where I spent 4 years with women, 2,000 capable, interesting women who lifted each other up. I am missing that. So I set about on an experiment and asked a few friends of friends, do you know a few interesting women who might want to come over to my house? I'm looking for 4 quarters, not 100 pennies. I mean, I want to develop some relationships that I can trust, that nurture my soul, that I can nurture. And I want to talk about these feelings of being lost and isolated. And who am I going to talk about them with? And sure enough, friends of friends suggested people, and I found myself with 12 women over in my home in San Francisco. And we started talking. Tamsin Smith, who is a friend of mine, distant friend, now good friend, then distant friend, and is a poet and an artist, she sort of led us in a discussion that was not so much about poetry, but it was about beginning that common ground that allowed us to connect. And at the end of the evening, we all felt, wow, that was something incredibly deep and meaningful, and I just talked about things that I haven't had a safe place to talk about. This is before the days of MeToo, before we were told to lean in. This was a time when there was not a space for women to connect with women who were not like them. And let me be clear, when those first 12 women were 20 years old to 80 years old. There was racial diversity. There was a wide range of levels and interests and life stages. The one thing that we all had in common was that we were in some sort of transition, in some sort of space in between. In fact, we were parlaying one thing into another thing. And I thought, that word parlay, that's a pretty cool word. And in fact, it's very much like the French word parler, which means to speak. And here we are speaking really candidly, really openly, supportively of each other. How wonderful. And so I'm like, I've got to own this word. I've got to own this website. Some things don't change, right? So I'm looking and I Google parlay.com, and I find out that a parlay is a gambling term. Now, you guys might know this better than others, being in a gambling state. But a parlay means the bet is greater when multiple people are in it together. And I thought, oh, this was meant to be. And so at the end of our 12-person gathering, we sort of said, should we do it again next month? I said, I'd love to host. And then we decided, well, I have a couple friends I could bring. I have a couple friends I could bring. And the next month we had 40, and the next month we had 80. And before I knew it, we had 3,000 women who were coming on a rotating basis to content-based events in my home. And it was an incredible feeling. And what it really said to me is that there's this huge unmet need to invite strangers into your home, to have the conversations that no one's having, to do it in a Vegas-like way. What stays here, what happens here stays here. And it was magical. And then I started hearing the stories that the evenings were not stopping when everybody went home. In fact, there were huge cascades of things that started to take place. So at that time that Parlay had really blossomed and my kids were blossoming and everything was sort of getting on solid ground, I started to mentor this young woman who was in Cambodia, family survived genocide. She was the first generation to go to college, high-performing young woman in her school, perfect national exam scores, and she was trying to take the TOEFL exam, which is English as a second language. And my job as her mentor was to help her get a full scholarship. The TOEFL was freaking her out. She had no skills for coping with her anxiety and no way to deal with this. And I thought, oh, all of this amazing hard work is for naught, until I remembered a conversation I'd had at the last Parlay House event where I met Hannah Manfredi, who's 27, and she is a mindfulness practitioner, and she was telling me that she had recently created a program to teach mindfulness in inner city schools to help kids who didn't have great coping mechanisms learn what to do with their anger, learn what to do with their worry, learn how to deal with some of the stuff in their lives. And I thought, oh God, I wonder if Hannah could call Srelek and just coach her through some basic things to do so that she can get through this exam that I knew she was completely capable of passing. And she did, and Srelek got the scholarship. And I thought, okay, that is an amazing cascade. And then Srelek arrived, and what did she decide to do but use her skills in math to become a math tutor to help kids who, like her, were lacking a certain ability and with a little bit of coaching could achieve their potential. And I thought, oh my God, this is an amazing chain reaction cascade of events. What's happening here? And then Parlay House expanded. I was in New York, I think it was our second event in New York, and we were having Joy Gordon, who is the worldwide CEO of Dress for Success, talk about her personal journey leading this global organization. And she was amazing, and at the end of the discussion, one of the women who I didn't know in the audience said, you know, Anne, I read about you when I was in prison, and I thought, when I get out of prison, I want to be part of a safe community like this. I want to lift other women, and here I am. And I get choked up. I'm thinking, oh my God, how could this be a thing? This is absolutely amazing. And then she continued, and she said, and Joy, when I got out of prison, you helped me with my resume. Your team gave me the clothes to wear. It is because women like you looked out for a woman like me that I'm here today. Her name is Ivy Wolf-Turk. She went on to create an amazing organization called Project Reformation, which is helping women who are returning to society after prison get their own sea legs back. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. We've created a cascade where one woman is doing one small thing and pulling another woman forward. What a miraculous truth. And I was going to write a book about it. And then, being a self-doubter, as we all are, I thought, I don't have science. This is just theoretical. I know these stories. I'm doubting myself. And I decided I need to do some research. So I found this incredible research professor, Dr. Serena Chen at Berkeley, and together we conducted a quantitative study to track what I'm calling the parlay effect and to see among strangers in an online survey, what are people telling us? And we bucketed our survey into three groups. The givers, the people like Hannah, like Joy, who had initiated cascades of events that were small, that were something achievable by them because it was based on their natural ability, their superpower. And then we had a second group, the receivers, who could recount to us a time when someone did something for you that made you feel seen. And what did you do with that information? And then we had this group, we thought, what if nobody can tell us a story? We don't want this research to fail, so let's have this extra bucket of the witnesses, people who didn't necessarily generate anything, or people who didn't necessarily remember receiving, but they could tell you the story of somebody else. And the data was fascinating. The first part was the givers had found a way to see people in a way that they could coach them, they could mentor them, they could take someone at work who was struggling, they could notice the woman down the street who needed a few extra groceries and bring them. And it was very moving. And what we saw in the receivers was they were so moved by being seen that they too became givers. Now, you might cynically be saying, yeah, this is pay it forward. But it wasn't just pay it forward, because the third bucket was the kicker. The third bucket of the witnesses would tell us a story like this. I was sitting in my car at 7-Eleven, and the guy next to me went into 7-Eleven. There were some homeless people outside, and when he came out, he handed them an extra sandwich, and the homeless people walked across the street and shared the sandwich with the other people. And I was sitting in my car, and I was watching that, and I thought, oh, that was a pretty good thing to do. I'm going to go into 7-Eleven, and when I come out with my stuff, I'm going to buy a sandwich too. And he did. And this is what I call the power of the witness. When you're in that space in your life where you feel you don't have enough to combat the weight that's around you, and how are you as an individual person going to be able to make a change? We now know it's not just pay it forward, it's pay it outward. I call it the parlay effect, and it's a fan-like effect that says, if I care, and if I do something, and if I act in an overt way, I'm gonna create a cascade where other people follow me, and together, connected, we have the potential to make the change that each of us as individuals we thought was impossible. Thank you so much.